On November 28, 1987, a developing fire filled the cockpit of a Boeing 747 with blinding smoke, leaving the crew in a desperate fight for control. Minutes later, its shattered wreckage floated alone in the Indian Ocean. 159 people were gone, and the world was left with a question that still haunts aviation. What happened to Flight 295? This wasn't just a routine night crossing. Hidden among the cargo were items that raised serious questions. In this video, we'll reconstruct the final hours and dive into the theories, explosive chemicals, political secrecy, and evidence that still doesn't add up. The story begins at Taipei International Airport, where a 7-year-old South African Airways 747 combi, named the Helderberg, was preparing for a regular flight to Johannesburg, South Africa, with a stop-off in Mauritius. The combi variant of the 747 allowed the rear one-third of the main deck to be loaded with cargo. The aircraft was carrying 6 cargo pellets on its main deck. Just before departure, Taiwanese officials conducted an unannounced detailed inspection of this cargo. They formally declared that nothing suspicious was found, a finding that would later be viewed with skepticism, given the close yet secretive political ties between the two nations. In front of the cargo area sat 140 passengers, mostly South Africans returning home. The captain, 49-year-old David Jacobus Ace, was a former South African Air Force pilot with 13,843 hours of experience, including 3,884 hours on the Boeing 747 series aircraft. Next to him were 36-year-old First Officer David Atwell, and behind them were 45-year-old flight engineer Giuseppe Bellegarda. The crew seemed calmed and relaxed, unaware of the catastrophic events that lay before them. At 10:25 local time, the 747 lifted off into the sky. The flight cruised uneventfully at 35,000 feet for the next few hours. Passengers enjoyed their dinner and started to settle in for the remainder of the journey. However, 9 hours and 23 minutes in the flight, this seemingly ordinary crossing would turn into a pilot's worst nightmare. The sound of a smoke alarm from the main deck cargo area could only mean one uncomfortable truth to the crew. A fire had broken out. The crew quickly focused their attention on the island of Mauritius, still roughly 370 kilometers away. Less than an hour of flying time perhaps, but with an uncontrolled fire raging inside the aircraft, every single second mattered. The popping sounds you hear on the CVR are circuit breakers popping, as the fire rapidly burned through the aircraft's critical electrical wiring. Just 80 seconds after the smoke warning alarm went off, the blaze claimed the electrical wire supporting the CVR, and it too failed with a pop from the circuit breaker board. But even as the cockpit recorder went dead, the crew's fight for survival continued, and their desperate voices were soon heard by air traffic control in Mauritius.
Mauritius, Springbok 295.
Springbok 295, Mauritius, good morning, go ahead.
Good morning, we have a smoke problem and we're doing emergency descent to level 140.
Confirm you wish to descend to flight level 140?
Yeah, we have already commenced due to a smoke problem in the airplane.
Roger, you are clear to descend, you need lead to flight level 140.
Roger, we are on the pre-centers, you can alert the fire up.
Do you request a full emergency?
Okay, how can you hold?
Springbok 295, please, not?
Sorry, go ahead.
Do you request a full emergency, please, a full emergency?
That's Charlie.
Roger, I declare a full emergency, Roger.
Thank you.
Despite the captain's seemingly calm and professional tone, the deadly chaos was beginning to unfold on board. The crew commenced the emergency checklist, but smoke soon began to pour into the passenger cabin, making breathing difficult. As required by the checklist, the pilots activated the recirculating fans. The purpose of these fans is to clear smoke after a fire is put out, but this time, the fans did the opposite. In a Boeing 747, these fans take air from the passenger area, mix it and push it back out. Because the cargo fire was still burning and extremely hot, the area was full of toxic smoke. By turning on the fans, the crew unintentionally sucked the deadly smoke directly from the main main cargo hold and pushed it faster through the entire air system. This action turned a system designed to clear the air into a deadly smoke distributor, which rapidly sped up the incapacitation of everyone on board. Simultaneously, the cabin crew members made a heroic and desperate effort, attempting to enter the main deck cargo bay to fight the blaze with portable extinguishers. They could not even reach the fire. The heat was already scorching, and the toxic smoke was so thick and blinding that the crew was immediately forced back. This tragic attempt, however, highlighted a critical design flaw. The 747 Combi's main deck cargo hold lacked a built-in automated fire suppression system. This was because safety regulations at the time assumed that since the area was near the cabin, the crew would be able to manually put out any fire. Without that automated system, the crew was completely defenseless against the inferno.
Look to 95, please, huh?
Go ahead.
Request your actual position, please, and your DME distance.
We haven't got the DME yet.
Roger, and your actual position, please.
Second?
Your actual position.
Now, we've lost a lot of electrics. We haven't got anything on the aircraft now.
Roger, I declare a full emergency immediately.
Roger.
By now, SAA 295 was in a terrifying emergency descent as critical systems continued to fail around the crew. The pilots frantically radioed their intent, while the cabin crew attempted to move the passengers as far forward in the plane as possible, but it was already too late. The lethal toxic smoke was rapidly filling the cabin, and many passengers were already beginning to succumb to its effects. The pilots knew they had one desperate, risky option yet, to open the cabin doors. This required descending to an altitude where passengers could breathe the outside air, and slowing the plane down to 200 knots to prevent the doors from being ripped off by air pressure. Slowing down, however, meant prolonging the time it would take to reach Mauritius. With passengers choking, the choice was clear. As the plane descended to about 15,000 feet, the crew opened the cabin door. The hope was that the change in air pressure would quickly clear the smoke out of the cabin, but this drastic move had two deadly side effects. It gave the fire a huge blast of fresh, oxygen-rich air, which likely caused a massive new flare-up in the cargo area. And two, it changed the airflow inside the plane, pushing a torrent of smoke toward the cockpit and blinding the pilots.
Hey, Tom, sit down there, oxygen lead.
Sorry, say again, please.
That's right. Someone's down the fire. We see these At
12:04 UTC, the flight was still 250 kilometers away from Mauritius, and the situation was becoming hopeless. Hardly any onboard systems were still functional, and the pilots could barely see their instruments through the thick smoke.
295 for request pilot intention.
we'd like it on 13.
Confirm runway 14.
Can't tell me.
Affirmative, you are cleared direct to Foxtrot. You report approaching 50.
Okay.
This would be the crew's final communication with anyone outside the aircraft. From the exterior of the plane, the fire's devastating effects were now visible. The intense heat had started to blister the paint, melt the metal, and pop the rivets along the fuselage. On the right side, the fire had finally burnt through the upper fuselage skin, creating a massive aerodynamic drag that forced the plane into a slow but irreversible right bank. The aircraft was no longer just losing electronics, it was rapidly losing its structural integrity and stability. Back in the cockpit, the plane was becoming violently uncontrollable until the inevitable failure occurred, a catastrophic loss of hydraulics. The pilots were now mere passengers in their own doomed aircraft. At around 12:05 UTC, roughly 2 minutes after their final desperate call, the 747 began a rapid, uncontrolled terminal descent. The severe right bank only worsened, pushing the aircraft to an angle of nearly 90 degrees. The extreme stress on the airframe, combined with the immense damage from the fire, was more than the structure could bear. At approximately 12:07 hours, the aircraft began its final, violent breakup. First, the roof of the 747 tore away, followed immediately by the entire tail section shearing clean off the fuselage. With the tail gone, the fracturing continued. Next, the massive wings would snap away. The main fuselage, with less air resistance, plunged toward the ocean faster than the separated wings, until, at roughly 12:07 UTC, the remains of SAA 295 vanished into the darkness of the Indian Ocean. At 12:08 UTC, the air traffic controller desperately called out the flight's designation, Springbok 295, Plaisance, but all that answered was static and silence. The lack of any response from the aircraft was all the confirmation the controller needed that 159 innocent lives had just been lost forever. 2 days after the crash, the first tangible signs of the disaster appeared. Small pieces of wreckage, scattered luggage and debris were discovered floating in the ocean near the coast of Mauritius. While these floating fragments confirmed the disaster, they represented only fragmented evidence of the total loss. The main body of the aircraft remained lost, resting over 4 kilometers below the surface, and it took an intense search effort 40 days to find it. Finally, on January 6, 1988, investigators located a massive wreckage field, approximately 250 kilometers southeast of Mauritius, using a specialized deep-sea sonar scanner. The site was catastrophically deep, around 4,900 meters or 16,100 feet, significantly deeper than the Titanic. This extreme depth immediately and severely hampered the entire recovery and investigation. The recovery effort, known as Operation Resolve, was unprecedented in its cost, estimated at 28 million rand at the time. While the cockpit voice recorder was recovered 12 months later, it only yielded 80 seconds of useful fire-related communication. Crucially, the flight data recorder, which would have logged system performance, was never found, further crippling the official inquiry. Even with the limited evidence at their disposal, the families of 159 demanded answers. Initial headlines suggested the plane went down due to a possible technical malfunction or onboard fire. After the investigation was completed in 1990, the Margot Commission confirmed the plane was brought down by fire, but the cause of the fire remained undetermined. This explanation was insufficient for many, leading to circulating theories of a cover-up. With the wreckage sitting deeper than the Titanic, the FDR missing, and the CVR only recording 80 seconds of critical communication, there was little concrete evidence for investigators to review, or was it made to appear that way? Perhaps the South African Airways harbored a secret as to why the fire had started on board the Helderberg. South Africa was willing to spend millions on the recovery operation. Was their motive purely humanitarian? Or was it to ensure that no other nation would figure out exactly what was on board SAA 295 the night of the incident? Furthermore, during a typical air disaster investigation, the only audio evidence available would have been the CVR and the ATC communications. However, SAA Flight 295 had a third crucial audio source that could have completed the investigation. That source was SAA's own private long-range radio facility in Johannesburg called SAA. This was the crew's independent link to their home base, recording all operational communications. We know Flight 295 communicated with SAA the night of the accident. However, the crucial section of the SAA tape covering the final moments of the flight vanished. Investigators only have the recordings for the nights before and after the crash. The tapes for the night the Helderberg went down are missing entirely. Captain Ace may have contacted SAA earlier in the flight, perhaps 2 hours in, reporting cargo trouble and requesting permission to divert to an airport in Asia. SAA would have allegedly denied this critical request, forcing Ace to continue towards Mauritius to prevent foreign officials from inspecting the aircraft and exposing what was on board. If this conversation were true and had been revealed, it would have conclusively proven a catastrophic cover-up and implicated the highest levels of South African government in the disaster. Therefore, it was far more convenient for these tapes to simply vanish, forever concealing the truth of what had happened on that fatal night. So what exactly was South Africa trying to hide? And what truly was loaded on board the Helderberg that night? We know the fire originated in the front right cargo pallet. The waybill stated the pallet contained textiles, electronic equipment and computers. However, the new South African government that formed in 1994 did their own investigation 10 years after the incident and questioned the authenticity of the waybills from the original inquiry. They had good reason to believe so, as although some of these items contained lithium-ion batteries, which was new and flammable technology at the time, forensic evidence was found suggesting the fire produced far more heat than these batteries alone could produce. During the recovery of some of the plane's wreckage, investigators found a partially melted tennis racket. This may not seem significant, but the racket was made from graphite, which only burns at around 600 degrees Celsius or 1112 degrees Fahrenheit. Further analysis of a burnt piece of interior fuselage confirmed that the fire was not only contained, but burnt fiercely at a high temperature well above 1000 degrees Celsius or 1832 degrees Fahrenheit. This extraordinary internal heat was so overwhelming that it also manifested on the aircraft's outer structure. Investigators speculated that the skin on the outside of the plane reached temperatures as high as 300 degrees Celsius or 572 degrees Fahrenheit. While 300 degrees Celsius may sound reasonable, when you factor in the extreme continuous cooling from the frigid minus 50 degrees Celsius to minus 60 degrees Celsius air rushing past the plane at 500 knots, such an exterior temperature is definitive proof of an accelerated super hot chemical blaze. For these temperatures to be reached, when you examine the political climate of South Africa at the time, this leaves us with one plausible theory for what was on board to start this fire: ammonium perchlorate, otherwise known as rocket propellant. During the 1980s, South Africa was engaged in a border war with Angola, while simultaneously facing a strict international arms embargo due to its racist policies. An embargo during wartime created major crises for the military. South Africa was thus forced to bypass international law entirely and clandestinely source vital materials from suppliers abroad. Flying these materials on a military transport plane was too risky, as it would expose the nation to interception and guaranteed international condemnation. Instead, a government-controlled civilian airline, like SAA, offered the perfect cover. No other nation would suspect that South Africa would risk transporting military-grade equipment on a civilian aircraft with its own citizens on board. It was the ultimate deceptive strategy. Because of the border war, South Africa was secretly developing its own medium-range ballistic missile, the RSA-3. The key components for the solid rocket propellant, such as ammonium perchlorate, were extremely difficult to produce locally. Therefore, they were often sourced covertly from Taiwan, which quietly maintained deep defense links with Pretoria. The Taipei route was a regular part of SAA's schedule, making it the perfect low-suspicion transportation path. If you recall, there was a surprise inspection of the cargo in Taipei, where officials officially found nothing suspicious. This lack of finding leaves only two possibilities. Either SAA was exceptionally skilled at concealing the illicit material, or the Taiwanese officials chose to look the other way. This silence would be due to the close military and political alliance between the two nations, which were both seen as international outcasts at the time. Evidence suggests an unspoken agreement existed between the Taiwanese authorities, SAA, and the South African government to routinely overlook sensitive or military cargo, especially given their highly secretive nuclear technology exchange, where South Africa supplied uranium and Taiwan provided technical expertise. Some testimony presented claimed Captain Ace knew what was on board his plane, and initially refused to fly due to the inherent danger involved. He only proceeded after alleged telephone calls from a senior SAA official, and possibly a former cabinet minister, threatening him with summary dismissal. Ultimately, the evidence suggests that Captain Ace was placed in an impossible position, either lose his career, or fly a time bomb toward his own demise. But why was Captain Ace so deeply concerned about the dangers of flying with illicit material like rocket propellant? The answer lies in the highly volatile nature of the cargo itself, and how it tragically interacted with the aircraft. The major problem with transporting cargo such as rocket propellant is that as a strong oxidizer, it provides its own oxygen source, making the fire self-sustaining and able to defeat normal fire extinguishing methods. Moreover, it can decompose and self-ignite when subjected to heat, shock, friction, or when contaminated with trace materials. Something as simple as a mere hint of turbulence could ignite the rocket propellant, and once ignited, extinguishing it with the crew's onboard equipment would be impossible. The resulting extreme heat would negate Boeing's safety features for the 747 Combi variant designed to keep smoke out of the passenger cabin. Furthermore, the pilot's checklist for the night of the accident was based on the false assumption that the fire was a controllable non-chemical blaze. Consequently, following the checklist's instructions to turn on the recirculating fans and open the cabin doors only accelerated the deadly spread of heat and smoke, leading to the inevitable. Ultimately, the crash of Flight SAA 295 was not merely an accident caused by equipment failure or human error. It was a disaster rooted in a calculated act of deception. The combination of an illegally smuggled, highly volatile material and a checklist that was tragically insufficient for that specific threat guaranteed the fate of everyone on board. The depth of this deception is what led to the next crucial investigation. 10 years after the crash, the new post-apartheid government formed the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to expose atrocities and cover-ups of the apartheid era, including the Helderberg crash. Their investigation was ultimately inconclusive, but it made clear that they strongly believed that there was a cover-up in the former regime. Perhaps it was in the new government's best interest to remain silent about the full truth of the Helderberg tragedy, as SAA was still the government airline, and exposing past illegal activities may still have damaged the airline's reputation, even though it was no longer controlled by the apartheid government. But the political motives for silence did not end the need for answers. The multiple failures of the investigation, from the missing flight recorder to the vanished Zur tapes, created a narrative vacuum that only fueled suspicion. The official inquiry ultimately failed to find a cause, but by combining the political context with the forensic evidence, the steps that led to the crash became tragically clear. We can now reconstruct the devastating, moment-by-moment breakdown that led to the Helderberg disaster. The process began with the seed of disaster. South Africa, desperate for illicit rocket propellant for the RSA-3 missile program, intentionally smuggled the materials aboard a civilian plane. They did this because a military flight would have guaranteed interception, due to the arms embargo, whereas the SAA Combi, with its weak cargo safety standards, offered the perfect low-suspicion vessel for illegal materials. This led directly to the ignition. The highly unstable propellant, likely due to a slight shock or turbulence, self-ignited in the main deck cargo hold. The resulting overwhelming force saw the fire instantly become a self-sustaining chemical blaze, generating heat far exceeding 1000 degrees Celsius, and instantly making the manual suppression efforts of the crew impossible. This brought about the fatal checklist. Following the standard, outdated procedures, the crew turned on the recirculating fans and later opened the cabin doors, tragically feeding the fire oxygen and accelerating the deadly smoke throughout the cabin. Finally came for the final act of deception. As the plane began to break apart, the South African government ensured the Zur tapes vanished, the FDR remained lost, and the original waybills were never truly scrutinized, ensuring that the official inquiry could only ever conclude the cause was undetermined, thereby concealing the high-level cover-up. Ultimately, the truth was lost at the bottom of the ocean, with key evidence missing and the main wreckage over 4 kilometers deep. We may never know with 100% certainty what cargo was truly on board the Helderberg the night of the incident. But the question remains, can you look at the evidence, the scorching heat, the missing Zur tapes, the coerced captain, and still dismiss the theory that this was more than just an accident? All the forensic and political evidence points towards a terrifying conclusion. Until someone with key insider details comes forward, the story of Flight SAA 295 and its 159 innocent victims will remain forever shrouded in the dark history of conspiracy. We have presented the most detailed theory possible. What conclusion does the evidence lead you to? Share your thoughts and perspective on the disaster in the comments below.